Hi, and welcome to this live reading from Everything to Me by Lauren Fraser, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1. Holy cow, this was really happening. Today was the day she was finally going to get Pete Saunders out of her system once and for all. The man had been living in her head rent-free for too long. Kendall's hands trembled as she knocked on Pete's front door. Shifting her carry-on bag up her shoulder while she waited for him to answer, she mentally prepared herself for seeing him again. Taking a deep breath, she exhaled, trying to calm her nerves. Oh boy. She couldn't believe she was staying at Pete's house or that he'd agreed. When her brother Ryan had suggested she stay with his best friend while she was in town, she thought he was crazy. But the more she thought about it, the more it seemed like the perfect way to finally get over this stupid adolescent crush. Well, here's hoping the reality lives up to her vivid imagination. The front door opened and her teenage crush stood before her in the flesh, and even better than she remembered. The air whooshed out of her lungs at the first sight of him in his low-slung gray sweatpants and the threadbare Metallica t-shirt. She thought she'd been prepared. Clearly she wasn't. What was it about this man that he always affected her like this? Pete stared back at her, not saying anything, and she shifted nervously on her feet. Hey, sorry I'm late. There were some issues with the plane. No problem, he replied. His green eyes scanned down her body, lingering on her waist, then back up. She licked her lips. Pete had never looked at her like this before. Like she was a woman and not just his friend's annoying little sister. Damn, it was a heady feeling. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. Hi, thanks for letting me stay. Of course. He stepped back and looked down at her. It's good to see you, Peanut. And they were back. Whatever that brief look had been, it was gone. Now she was just Ryan's kid sister, Peanut. Can we not call me that, please? Pete's eyes twinkled as he smirked at her. What? You don't like the nickname? He chucked her on the chin. It's cute 'cause you're so small. I'm not that small, she grumbled. Pete raised his eyebrow. You're not very big. She placed her hands on her hips and glared at him. Next to you, no, but I'm 5'4". That's average, I'll have you know. He chuckled and raised his hands up in defeat. Sorry, my mistake. She stepped past him and walked into the entranceway. Her eyes were drawn to the exposed brick and wood beams. His place was beautiful, so warm and inviting. When she first pulled up to the older building, she'd expected some modern converted warehouse with lots of metal and white, but this was anything but that. Wow, she murmured. Pete smiled. Come on in. A calico cat popped out from behind the entrance bench and wove its way around her legs. Well, hello there, and who are you? Kendall said as she bent down to scratch the fur behind the cat's ears. That's Mooch, Pete replied. Mooch? Seriously? Yeah, it fits him perfectly well. He looks all cute and innocent, but he's not. He's crafty. Pete narrowed his eyes as he looked at the cat in question. When did you get a cat? I thought you hated them. The boy she remembered had sided with Ryan to convince her parents not to allow her to get a cat when she was 15 because they smelled and were gross. Never in a million years would she have pictured him with one of his own. I do, but he bent down and scooped up Mooch. He's not really mine. Oh, no? She eyed the cat tree in the corner of the room. He looks like he's your cat. He's not. He's just recovering from an injury and needed a place to crash. He stroked his hand along the back flank of the cat, and she saw the injury to his hind leg. Kendall bit her cheek to hold in her laugh at his serious tone. Gotcha. He's just a temporary roommate, then. She walked closer to examine the stitches. How'd he get hurt? She asked. The vet wasn't sure, but thought maybe he'd been in a fight. The vet? She smirked, then coughed to hide her amusement. So you took the cat that isn't yours to the vet? Well, Pete's ears turned red as he looked down at the ground. He was hurt. He rubbed the back of his neck, his bicep flexing with the movement. Couldn't just leave him. She stroked the cat's ear and glanced up at Pete. Her heartbeat quickened the way it always did when she was close to her brother's good friend. He even smelled good. How did you know he was hurt? He shrugged. He came over to show me? Kendall snorted. What do you mean he came over to show you? Pete glanced at her and scowled. He's been hanging around lately, and he showed up yesterday morning, and he looked pretty rough, so I took him to the vet. They had to put a drain in his leg so it doesn't get infected, and I couldn't just put him back on the street when it will need to be taken out in a few days. Of course not. So, you got a cat? No, it's just temporary, Pete scowled. And the cat tree? She asked, indicating the elaborate tree in the corner. I didn't want him to get bored, Pete muttered. Oh my God, could the man be any sweeter? She patted him on the shoulder. I hate to break it to you, but I think you've got yourself a cat. He glanced down at the cat in his arms. Shit. Kendall laughed. All right, show me around this ridiculous place of yours. She looked at the high warehouse ceilings in the living room and over to the wooden staircase that led to what looked like additional rooms upstairs. How did you find this place? She trailed her hand along the smooth kitchen countertop. The kitchen was a cook's dream. She traced the lines in the quartz that made it look like marble. It was exactly the counter she would have chosen if she had her own home. You don't like it? Pete asked. What? No, I love it. It's amazing. Oh, you said ridiculous, so I wasn't sure. She squeezed his arm at the hint of vulnerability she heard in his voice. I meant ridiculous in a good way. Pete grinned, exposing his perfect white teeth. Her heart fluttered in her chest. It was no wonder he had all kinds of product endorsements. The man was gorgeous. Your brother thought I was an idiot when I bought this place. Well, yeah, my brother has no vision. She looked around the open floor plan of the warehouse. Does this go right out to water? She dashed towards the large sliding glass doors along the back wall. Yeah, I've got a dock with my boat right outside. It's perfect. She looked at the wall of glass along the entire side of the space. What about privacy? She asked, pointing at the windows. One-way glass. I can see out, but no one can see in. Oh, that's genius, she replied. Pete waggled his eyebrows. I'm not just a pretty face. Well, smart enough to buy a cool place when you see one, she teased. No, this was just a huge abandoned old warehouse when I bought it. That's why your brother thought I was nuts to want to live here. I had it converted into 3 separate units. I sold the other 2, which paid for mine. Seriously? She looked around the space with fresh eyes, seeing everything about the place differently now that she knew Pete had a hand in creating the entire place. I didn't know you knew how to do this kind of stuff. He laughed. I don't, but I'm smart enough to hire people who can build it the way I want. But you picked out everything and designed it? His face turned red and he shrugged. I know what I like, and so it's not that hard to hire people to do it when you have money. Do you have pictures of it from before? Yeah. He grabbed her hand. Excitement zipped through her veins at the simple contact. Good Lord, she really was like a schoolgirl around him. Come here, he said as he tugged her towards the door on the left that led into a huge home gym. He stopped in front of a row of large framed photographs of an old, run-down and grungy warehouse. She leaned in closer to look at the pictures. Is this it? She trailed her fingers along the photo. It looked nothing like the place now. Wow, Pete, this is amazing. I don't know how you looked at that and made this. He laughed. Again, I didn't make it. I hired people to make it. He looked around the room. Well, this is clearly the gym. Feel free to use it while you're here. He glanced back at her. You never said how long you were here for. I think I'll be here a week. I hope that's okay. Yeah, of course it's fine. You can stay as long as you need to, he told her. They walked back out into the main living area, and Pete gestured to the stairs along the right side of the room. Bedrooms are upstairs. He gestured for her to go first. Are you helping Ryan with his renos? Because he'd be an idiot not to have asked your opinion after seeing this place. Yeah, I helped him with a few things. We have pretty different taste. Kendall snorted. That was putting it mildly. Her big brother was a traditionalist. Ever since he was a little boy and talked about making it to the major leagues, he dreamed of having a big house with a gate that he needed to buzz people into and the house that had to have a pool. When he'd finally bought his first home, those things had still been on the top of the list. I have to admit I thought I was a bit more traditional too, but now that I've seen this place, I think you've converted me. A smile spilt across Pete's face. Yeah? Oh my God, yes. Now show me the bedroom. Silence filled the room. She glanced over at him and the air crackled between them. He stared at her and then cleared his throat and the moment was gone. Right. I'll show you to your room. What had that been about? She'd had a crush on Pete since the first time she'd laid eyes on him when she was 12 years old, and it had never gone away. If anything, over the years, the crush had grown. Now, being here in his space, seeing what he created and getting this inside glimpse of the man he'd become, the crush would never go away. She'd always just assumed she didn't stand a chance, but if that look was anything to go by, maybe she did. Conscious of Pete walking up the stairs behind her, she slowed down slightly and added a little extra sway to her hips. She heard him groan behind her. "What was that?" she asked. "Nothing. I just noticed the cat's toys leaning against the built-in vacuum vent, and I don't want to forget to move it before I turn it on." "Gotcha," she smirked and flipped her brown hair over her shoulder. Seducing Pete Saunders just became her new mission while she was here. If he was interested in her in the least, there was no way she wasn't making the most of this trip. At the top of the stairs, Pete brushed past her and walked into a large bedroom. A king-size bed sat in the center of the room. Large windows looked out over the harbor. "One-way glass in here, too?" she asked. "Of course." He picked up a remote from the bedside table. "You can add some extra tint to the windows as well if you don't like the sun beaming in. It's kind of like built-in blinds, but it's just a window filter." He set the remote down on the table. "I like being woken up to the morning sun, but I know not everyone does." He continued to walk deeper into the bedroom. "You have your own bathroom through here," he said, and led her through the doorway. "Wow, this bathroom alone is as big as my bedroom at home." She eyed up the steam shower with multiple heads and moaned. "Oh, I'm going to enjoy using that." Pete cleared his throat. "Right, make yourself at home. The towels are on the rack or clean." He glanced at her, then back at the shower. I'll let you get settled." I want to see your room," she replied. Pete groaned. "Sure." "What's the groan about?" she asked. "Nothing, I didn't groan." "Yeah, you did. Jesus, Ken, drop it, please." She stepped closer to him, and he stepped back. "Do I make you uncomfortable, Pete?" she asked. "What? No, of course not." "Interesting. Then why did he look like he wanted to flee?" She took another step toward him. His eyes darkened as he held her stare. "You sure?" she whispered. "Be careful, Kendall." "Of what?" "What you're asking for," he replied. His nostrils flared as he watched her. She placed her hand against his muscular chest. "What am I asking for?" She licked her lips as she held his stare. "Fuck," he muttered, and stepped away from her. "That's a bad idea, Kendall, and you know it." "Why is it a bad idea?" "Because your brother would kill me," Pete protested. "No, he wouldn't. You guys are friends. He likes you." Pete rolled his eyes. "There's a big difference between liking me as a buddy and liking me enough to let me touch his sister. Ryan doesn't like anyone that much." "Well, then it's a good thing my brother doesn't get to decide who I fuck." "Jesus," Pete groaned. "In case you hadn't noticed, I'm all grown up, Pete." "Believe me, I noticed," he grumbled. "So what's the problem?" she asked, and stepped toward him again. "We're obviously attracted to each other. We're both healthy, single adults. What's the harm in having a little fun while I'm here? Again, your brother is one of my best friends, and he'd kill me if I took advantage of you while you're staying with me." "Oh my God, did you seriously just say that?" Kendall scoffed. "Take advantage of me because the poor little lady couldn't possibly know her own mind?" She poked him in the chest. "Believe me, Pete, I know my own mind, and if I fuck a guy, it's because I want to fuck him. Not because I'm so naive he's tricked me into it." He caught her hand as she continued to poke his chest. "I didn't mean it like that," he growled. "There's just like a code that you don't cross. You don't fuck your friend's ex, and you sure as hell keep your hands off his sister." "But what if the sister wants you to put your hands on her?" She leaned in so their bodies were touching, and he sucked in a breath. "Still, he'd kill me if he found out." "So maybe he doesn't need to find out," she whispered as she leaned in closer and shifted her hips. She could feel him getting hard against her stomach. He was definitely not immune to her. "I'm only here for a week, Pete. My brother is out of town. You and I barely ever see each other." She leaned in and whispered in his ear. "No one would ever have to know." His hand curled around her hip, and she bit back a smile. Not wanting to press her luck, she stepped back. "Think about it," she said, and turned and walked out of the bathroom. His body tensed like a caged animal, and he looked around the room. "We should head back downstairs," he said. Sure. Pete started to push past her. When his chest brushed against her shoulder, he stopped, muttered something unintelligible, and gestured for her to go first. Kendall bit back a smile. It was like he was scared to touch her. Maybe this would be easier than she thought.